Welcome to State of the State. I'm John Carlevale, hosting this program, and our guest is Walter Potenza, and we refer to him as Chef Walter, or Chef Walter Potenza. And I'm going to tell you just a little about him. He is the founder of Chef Walter Potenza Enterprises, and I will tell you, from what I've learned about him, he is indeed an entrepreneur. He does many, many different things besides being a chef. And some of the things that he does, I think perhaps our guests will be especially interested. For example, they may be interested in cooking school. They may be interested in food-inspired tours. And I want to tell you, this is just one example. A few weeks ago, I was watching a television program, and who was on it but the chef himself, and he was with, I think, 2 or 3 other chefs, and they were evaluating the cooking of a couple of beginners, and they finally decided who they thought had done the better job. And I've learned that he does many things of that nature, plus so many, many more. Like I said, he's an entrepreneur, he's very enterprising, and he is very successful at it. I could go on for the rest of this program, Chef, but we're going to get down to business. The chef is going to talk about the Italian immigration to the United States from Ellis Island to the table. And he's going to talk about a number of different things relative to that. He's going to talk a little bit about the history, a little bit about the assimilation and the obstacles that Italians experienced when they came here, the contributions and the culture input that Italians have, and of course, food and the power of the table, and then of course, American Italian cuisine, which is not quite exactly the same as Italian cuisine. Right. So, Chef, please begin. Wow. And you pace yourself, and I will try to keep up with you.
I want to thank you for inviting me and for your kind words. In addition to cooking, it's always been one of my passions to search, to protect the Italian identity in this wonderful land where I arrived in 1972 as just a lousy student in Italy, and we had the opportunity to come to America through my grandparents, who were business people in Virginia. So I ended up with this naturalization opportunity, and I came here. I came to Manhattan, lived with my aunt. Then things didn't go well there, moved to Rhode Island, where some of my family members owned restaurants. That's how we began cooking with them. I was never formally a trained chef, never went to cooking school, but I am a scholar of food. What that means is that I spend endless time and hours on researching food and studying it. And the technical ability, John, are in every one of us. Anybody can cook, I believe. Somebody is more, has a better aptitude than others. But it's the knowledge that keeps you going. I think it's the ability to know. And that ability to know has made life for me easier in the food business. And then I began, about 25 years ago, began collecting black and white photographs of the Italians that arrived here. And I would buy some of them from the Library of Congress in Washington. Many, I would ask Italian people if they had photographs of their family members. And I began collecting these to the point where I ended up having at some point an exhibit which is right now on the second floor of the Italo-American Club on Broadway.
On Broadway, of course.
So that's open to the public and it's free. Where I wanted to make, I wanted to have these notions, these news, these photographs be together. Because we are a race, the Italian race, who have landed just about everywhere in the world. We made major contribution everywhere we went, some detriments as well, but overall a nation that has given its children and helped the other nation grow. And it's the case of the United States. Many Italian Americans in our state, in Rhode Island, know very little about our history here. And so that was my objective, to put all this information together, and I began collecting them. So Rhode Island, and especially Rhode Island after, but if we think of the Italian immigration movement as divided in two different eras, one that was in the 1600 and one that was in 1870. And why is it important? Because the first group of immigrants who came to America were professional people, religious people, looking for religious freedom, artists, teachers, educators. The second immigration movement, after the 1865 unification of Italy, brought in the laborers. That's why it's important to say that Italians did not arrive in America after Italy was unified, 1865. Italians were already here in the middle of the 1600s.
I wonder if I may add a little bit to that. My great-grandmother was in charge of a large area where they produced fruits, vegetables, so forth and so on. And as that second event took place, she was in charge of over 100 people on that plantation, and they were not slaves.
Right.
They worked hard and they were paid well.
Of course.
And my great-grandmother was said to be an outstanding and brilliant person in that area of Italy. But as that second immigration began, her help left.
Of course.
And there was no one to work there anymore.
Right, to continue. Yeah.
And so that's the thing that prompted my family members to leave and come to Rhode Island.
Of course.
Yeah.
And like your family, many others who have had the opportunity to get here, and I keep referring to the 1600 time because in 1700, when America was an idea, when we began thinking about putting or pushing, the kingdom out of here and try to become independent people, there were many people who contributed to this creation of America. And so sometime in this particular time, we fall into the narratives and discourse that don't make any sense, because once you begin reading the American Constitution, you know that it was founded on solid grounds. You know what I mean? And Italians were very involved. One in particular, and I always say this because many people don't know, but there is a phrase, there is a little line in our Constitution: all men are created equal. And that was a phrase adopted by an Italian man, Filippo Mazzei, who was a doctor born in Tuscany, who immigrated to England, became a friend of Thomas Jefferson, actually his best friend, moves to Virginia, and began making wine with Thomas Jefferson in this vast area called Monticello, Monticello. Filippo Mazzei in one of his writings, he did not use his name. He didn't use his name, Filippo Mazzei. He was working for a newspaper in Virginia, and he used a sort of a name called, he called himself Furious. In one of his phrases, he says, all men are by nature free and independent. That phrase was borrowed by Jefferson, asking Filippo Mazzei if he could use it. He rephrased it, and all men are created equal. So I say that because a small part of Italy was able to make some sort of a contribution to that wonderful constitution that we have anyway.
Well, that's fascinating, and I will admit, I never heard of that before.
Filippo Mazzei returned to Europe. He lived there very well and so on. Then he returned to Europe. He became a citizen of Poland. They gave him sort of this citizenship to Poland. He traveled throughout Europe. And the last thing that he did was to, again, Thomas Jefferson was a very fluent Italian-speaking person, spoke Italian very well. He actually is the first person who brought in the first pasta machine in America, Thomas Jefferson.
Wow.
Yeah. But he asked Filippo Mazzei to send artists here to help to paint the Capitol building in Washington, and that's why inside, in that rotunda, that is there, sort of the symbolism of our liberty, if you will. Many of those paintings are from Brumidi, Canova, and all the Italian artists that were brought in by Mazzei. So that is just a little portion of that, what we call the first immigration, you know.
Yes.
Nothing, we have no reference of food at the time because the food portion came with the second immigration, which developed right after Italy was unified. So Italy in 1814 was a fragmented nation where about 13 families controlled 86% of the land. Mm-hmm. And so those areas were called duchies. One of the most important was the Medici family in Florence. And then at some point, Italy was unified, and dividing the north from the south was really not something that they wanted to do, and they put Italy under one flag. So they pushed the French people out from the north. They got together with the Vatican, which had its own army in the center, and pushed the Bourbons in the reign of the Two Sicily back to Spain. And that's how Italy got unified. So promises were made to the Italians of the South at the time that they were going to have a tax relief, they were going to have all their land sort of cleaned up a little bit, to give them the opportunity to run the business of agriculture. Over 75% of the people in Italy at the time were illiterate. So that didn't happen, and the immigration came in. The big America was looking for workers here. Our Industrial Revolution was looking for people. America lost a lot of its kids during the Civil War. Yes. They needed manpower. Italy was one of those countries who were willing to come here and work. And that's how we ended up at Ellis Island. It's very simple. And Ellis Island was the first port. The second port is none other than the lovely Allen's Avenue, Providence. Second port of entry in America, which is very, very rewarding, I think. So, anyways. So that was the interesting aspect of our immigration. With that, of course, came the cultural assimilation, the name changing. We always wonder why we changed our names in this country, right? We were trying to hide our identity because our parents always wanted us to fit in with the locals. And therefore, changing our last name was one way to enter, to make sure that nobody spoke Italian at home, that everybody spoke English, because Italian parents did not want the kids to be sort of segregated, you know, and so that's why when people say, oh, you know, my mother never spoke Italian to me, that happens, you know.
Well, that's a very interesting thing and a very different experience from what I had, because my first language was Italian.
Of course.
And it wasn't until it was time for me to go to school, I just happened to go to my grandmother, Nana, and she put her hand up and said to me, in Inglese, solo.
Solo.
I could not talk Italian to her anymore. I had to speak English.
Right.
She was a smart woman. She ran a store with her one of her sons, and she just understood that in order to be successful in school, right, you had to master the English language.
Yes. And it was because they knew that we were getting racially sort of abused, if you will. Often I think of, I compare those times with the current times that we've had when other nationalities, it's the fabric of America to welcome everybody. And when you welcome another culture, you welcome all their goods and you welcome all their bads, or whatever we want to call it. But nobody was as mistreated among all the European groups as the Italians were. We lost the first 11 lynched people in America, in U.S. history, were all Sicilian, in a town of Tallulah in Louisiana. And we lost them, they lynched them because the chief of police, Hennessy, was murdered. They blamed the Italians, who were at the time controlling the shores, the port of New Orleans. They were heavily involved in seafood. They were involved in the business of fruit and vegetables. They began to make some sense of their lives. And they blamed indiscriminately the Italian people. And history says it, because they were dark, they don't wash up as much, they try to steal all the time. These are phrases made, phrases pronounced by Chief of Police Hennessy. So what I'm trying to say is that at the time, it was very difficult even for our culture to get integrated here. And so New Orleans was one of the cases. So it wasn't easy for us. So the grandparents figured that by having the children speaking only English and little Italians at home, they will fit in a little quicker, that's all.
Of course.
And that made sense, because after we were able to attend schools, become doctors, lawyers, and so on, and just like any other ethnic groups, progress. So.
And it's a story in terms of what happens to people when they come here that isn't all that different to, in when you compare other groups of people from different parts of Europe and elsewhere. So we all have to, not have to, but we all went through a similar kind of experience before we were fully assimilated.
Absolutely.
And of course, some of us were probably better able to assimilate more quickly than others.
If you think that we've had in the United States in the middle of the 1880, we had a political party that developed from Congress, well, not out of Congress, but in the United States. It was called America First. And it's fascinating how in 2025 we are having similar discussion. America First never made it. Americans were not ready to do that. If you think that from 1903 to 1911, 10 million Italians entered in the United States, scared Congress. They, in 1923, created the Immigration Quota Act, Congress, because they were afraid that the American blood, and this is textual words, was going to be diluted, and that they feared that too many people from other countries will be coming here. From 23 to 35, only 3 million people entered the United States, and many of them went back home. But the funny part about that was that many of the people who lost, of all the ethnic groups who live in the United States, many of the kids who died in the First World War with the American flag on their neck were Italians. And so we contributed, even in the Civil War, we contributed in the First World War, Second World War, Italian children, kids of Italian grandparents. And so, and in addition to that, also during the 1700s. So we made our own contribution. So, and the contribution, the last one, it's of course, it's cuisine. You know, that's
well, I wanted to talk a little bit about, if I may, an experience that I had not too long ago. A dear friend of mine, God rest his soul, lived in Florida.
okay.
And he called me one day and said, I want you to visit with me because they're building a church here that is probably the first church that they've built of this caliber in 75 years in America.
Wow.
So I went down, visited him, and we looked at it, and we could see it being put together, and it was very Italian in design.
Style, yep.
And it was the center of this city that they were creating. And some time went by, I think it was close to 2 years. He said, come down again, we're gonna go look at it because they're almost finished, but they have to put the very top in place. So we went and we got on a tour bus, and the gentleman stops the bus and he says, you see what they've begun here? This work, we could not find anyone to do this work. We had to go to Rhode Island and Massachusetts to get the Italians and
the tradesmen.
Because they are the only people in the United States who know how to work with this kind of stone. And get it done. And of course, the two of us, looking at each other, we're laughing because
way from here.
So, that to me is some of the contributions that Italians have made. And
everywhere.
Talk a little bit more about the contributions.
The Italians were heavily involved, especially when we talk about our state here. When we arrived here, we arrived because the initial Italians arrived at Ellis Island. At Ellis Island, they had, right before the 1900, they had 5 employment offices inside. If you don't have anyone receiving you here at Ellis Island, if you don't have a relative or a friend, most of the people, they did not know how to write or read, so they will put a cross on the disembarkation paper. My grandfather, who became a wealthy man in the railroad business in Washington, had a cross on his paper, on his embarkation paper, and millions of others. If they don't have anyone receiving them here, they will go up to the agency, and the agency will say, what type of work did you do? And if you said, well, I work with stones, they will send you someplace where there was work related to that.
Sure.
Rhode Island. And many of the Portuguese as well here, by the way. That's why we have a seaport like New Bedford. New Bedford was created under the fact that many from the people from Madeira in Portugal were fishermen. That's how the city got started. But when it comes to Providence, Providence had all the masons, had all the woodworkers up here, sent up here because the people from Italy did that as a trade. Westerly is the example of one of the biggest quarry place in America for stone. The stone that has been excavated in Westerly, it's in every state house in America. So, and addition to that, many others. So, I mean, certainly then in the field of education, we were second to no one. So, I mean, those are some of the things. But when you're in Providence, it's often said, please don't look at the sidewalk, always look at the top, because many of the details that are in Rhode Island, especially in our city of Providence, was built by Italian people. So there's quite a bit of us here, you know, and I always like to go around and say that because I'm very proud of the work that all our ancestors have done, because it wasn't easy to get integrated in a country where there were two big obstacles, John: the language and religion.
Yes.
The first Italian people on Feather Hill, which, by the way, was the largest Italian settlement out of the 6 created in Rhode Island, Charles Street, Silver Lake, and so on. But the first one and the largest one, when the Italians went to church on Sunday, and they attended the church, they did not understand a single word. And that prompted them to go to Bishop Harkins, the Irish bishop, who was informed that they were willing to buy a parcel of land and to begin creating the first location for an Italian church, and asked Bishop Harkins to send a priest here. They brought in Father Parioli from northern Italy, and the Holy Ghost in Providence at the end of Atwells Avenue is the first Italian Catholic church in North America.
Yes.
So, I mean, those are some great positives anyways. But with that came also the food, and I think that you might have a question for me on food.
Talk a little bit about the food and the power of the table, as you said, and we just have probably about 2 more minutes remaining.
Yep. Let's do this. American Italian cuisine, it's a cousin of Italian cuisine.
Cousin.
That's a cousin. It's a tree with a big trunk, and every one of those branches, America is one of those branches, where we have taken, based on the ingredients that the immigrants found when they were here, found those ingredients, transformed them, adapted them to their culinary sort of a creation that they had, and they created their own cuisine, their own style. Italian food in Italy is in a rule of never more than 4 ingredients on a plate. American Italian is the opposite. More ingredients, the better. Italian people in Italy do not ingest garlic. American Italians live on garlic.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so there's all these little things. It's a philosophical difference.
I'm a garlic lover, by the way.
Yeah. It's perfectly fine. It's just that the digestive system don't always agree with every one of us. So we teach we give these suggestions when we do our cooking classes. The key, John, is simplicity. Italian food was made to be simple, not complicated. It was not technically very difficult to do, but it is about research, buy the best ingredients that you can, and work them minimally. That's all. And so that gives us the fact that we call that the power of the table, because our table, family gathers together all the time around a table with food that is plentiful.
I think, Chef Walter, we're going to have to ask you to come back.
We will do that.
Again, to get into the pots that we have not discussed. And I'm going to really look forward to that.
Yes, it'll be a pleasure.
You have been watching State of the State. Our guest, obviously, has been Chef Walter Potenza. And we're going to have him back soon, I hope, for another edition of State of the State.